Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you as usual from the Pine Hills Palace in the Extreme Studios just west of Orlando, Florida. I have LK from Parts Unknown and, of course, the young 20-something Professor Pixel, also from Central Florida. And tonight, Extreme TV, our special episode, we're reviewing Season 1 of Columbo, the original 1971 TV show with Peter Falk. We are in Episode 5, The Lady in Waiting. Obviously, Pixel, you've heard of William Shatner, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so he's been known for stuff in the 70s called spoken word, and that was actually a thing in the 60s and 70s, whether you get into the LSD-induced Timothy Leary poetry readings and such. The Lady in Waiting, lips red with rouge. She offered me pleasures I could not refuse. This, thankfully, is the first Columbo episode where I actually have the killer as a female, because I got to admit, not having seen any episodes of Columbo except the two William Shatner ones, I was hoping this would happen. I was hoping that we would have a female. We get it. That being said, with Leslie Nielsen as the guest star, it threw me for a loop because I immediately assumed from my Creepshow experience as a young teen in the 80s that it would have been him. So we're going to be talking about that in here, but I'm going to go on the record. I'm going to go on the record first, gentlemen. This episode is actually by far the worst episode of the 5 that we've seen. And I say that it's not a watchable episode, and there's certainly some really interesting things in it, to me, some actually fantastic things that they did. And it all has to do with the woman in here. But watching it on Peacock, where I'm currently seeing it, there was a hell of a lot of issues with the audio, with the dubbing, with the clipping, with the whole print to it. And I don't know if that's something that came across, and I really try not to be a snob about those sort of things. I don't care that it's dated. I don't care if it's a studio backlot, but it almost really took away because it was so noticeable. And I don't know if older television movies suffer that fate, but for some reason, the production value of this episode was shit to me. But it took away from what I would consider an interesting episode that initially we might say is a piece of shit. But on the surface, when we start talking about it, I'm going to defend some of the things I like about it. LK is the guest. Let me ask you first. You've been watching this before. This is a second or third watch for you, or maybe a 10th or 12th. What's your initial take on this episode?
Well, so this is one of the episodes that I always kind of classified as, say, a lower tier of the, I'll say, original part of the series. Because for me personally, I really do delineate between kind of like the NBC 70s Columbos and then the return 90s ABC.
Correct.
But upon a more kind of like in-depth viewing, for this show, I did find myself enjoying this more. And the key to that was kind of understanding Beth's, who is the murderer here, her kind of motivation and seeing her transformation. So overall, enjoyed it. I will agree with you that of the 5 that you guys have watched, that this is the weakest of the 5, but I don't think it's necessarily unwatchable or anything. And I'm really curious about the Peacock thing, because I watched it on Peacock too, and I did not pick up on audio or production issues. So I'm just wondering what I missed, or if because I've just watched so much TV and watched older days of TV that I'm just too forgiving for stuff.
It's like there's a weird edit in Back to the Future where the ladies, save the clock tower, and Marty's sitting there and he's wussing out with his girlfriend who writes his phone number down. There's a weird edit there that always stuck out in my mind with the way he looks on his face. And I don't know why, just under multiple viewings, it just really sticks out hard and heavy. And here, I don't know if it's, I do know that some of the streaming services, and this is a relevant point for the things we discuss here in Extreme Movie Show, whether it's television or movies and whatnot, is that if you watch, say, old Beavis and Butthead from the 90s, animated stuff, if you watch them, most of the time they've re-edited the music out, took out certain words, edited all that. And I hate that. I despise that with a passion. I don't know that there's anything offensive with Columbo so much here, but I can't imagine that some of the scenes that I could reference in here where it did it, but it wasn't just once or twice. It was multiple. It was a harsh edit, and it was just, I don't know if they just didn't have a lot of room to do it or whatever, but I expected more, I guess. That it just really stood out from all the seamless stuff we had. And yes, you have different directors, different writers necessarily, and so it's going to look different, maybe the way something is shot or how the information is communicated. That's fine. But yeah, there's some things in here that were just like, oh my God, what's going on here? And I did watch a secondary source, and I still saw the same thing. So that brings us to the young 20-something Professor Pixel, who we've given a few extra moments to consider his initial take, as he always starts us off in our episodes. Go ahead, sir.
This sucks. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This is the weakest episode, though. You're absolutely right. This episode, I know we were looking forward to a woman being the killer. We really were, but you're right. Production-wise, there's multiple issues. I don't think it's just Peacock. I think if we watched it on Tubi, it'd be the same thing. And I was kind of expecting Leslie Nielsen to be the killer as well. But we are introduced to Beth, and Beth is, I don't want to say she's a poor actress. I don't think that. It's just her.
Yeah, if you want to say that, that's okay. But what is it, and why is she that way? She what?
I don't think so. I don't. Like, everybody else that we've seen as the killer is like huge star power. I just don't think she has that presence. And maybe that was intentional, because her character is someone who is very much held back, and she feels that and resents that. And that's what leads to her doing what she does, which is killing her brother. But I suppose we should talk about the setup first.
Absolutely. Give it to me.
So we're introduced to Beth. She lives on this estate with her brother, who initially...
Richard Anderson, who I believe was $6 Million Man and other stuff. You know this guy if you watch TV.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he was Oscar Goldman, the head of the OSI in $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman. Among
Bam!
Other roles.
But here he is a very controlling older brother. Goes ahead, runs her life, so much so that somebody that she's been seeing within the company, his company, has proposed to her, or at least they were going along that line, and he has decided to put a stop to it. Went ahead and wrote him saying that, oh, well, you're not going to have to worry much about him anymore. I gave him a clear ultimatum. Either his job goes or you go. And she doesn't accept it. She doesn't accept it. So he has to go away on business again, and she hatches a plot. And this is another case of the murder that going ahead. It's premeditated. It's planned out. How well it's planned out is debatable. But she plans on accidentally killing her brother in the middle of the night after locking him out. So he'll have to come through the window to try to get in. Oh no, it's a burglar, and she'll be on sleeping medication that she's been prescribed. So she's not at fault. And yeah, I'll take a break here.
Yeah,
I'd like to point in for me that when I saw her, I thought, wow, she's going in her brother's room or her lover's or whoever, because we don't know it's a brother till afterwards, for like, she wants a bump, she wants a line of coke, she wants some Mary Jane, she wants some of the snow, the blow. And I thought, wait a minute, this isn't an 80s episode. But the excitement in her eyes that she's doing something, and I gotta admit, I popped hard. I love those old-fashioned big-ass keys that she had here too. And you're like, okay, what's she gonna do with the key? Why is she stealing it? What's it gonna be? Love the setup. I looked at her and went, okay, ginger alert. And I thought, she'd be kind of hot if she like dressed up a little bit. Why are they doing this? This is a 70s thing. We do know that for the episodes we've seen that they've not actually shown the violence. Here, they went a totally different route, which I thought was interesting. They show kind of the murder happening, and she's kind of like half drugged out. So it's a very trippy, like, I can only describe it as like a Pete's Dragonish kind of late 60s, early 70s kind of trippy scene and all that. And I didn't know if we need to see it a second time, but I think it was absolutely 100% intentional that she was made to look this way and all that, because boy, the transition she undergoes, it becomes quite obvious. And that's one of the highlights of watching this episode. So you could say this is an early episode of the 70s of feminism, not paying, but it's an interesting setup. Older brother, in the family business, there's a guy there that he basically says to her, hey, look, do you think he's marrying you for the money, basically? And she's like, no, he loves me. She's not so sure when she's on the phone with Leslie Nielsen, her lover. He seems like an average, chill kind of dude. And Leslie Nielsen's always had gray hair, people, so just leave it at that. He's one of those. And she's like, you do love me? And he's like, not at all. And he's really good at all, like with that kind of tone of voice. So it's not him at all. So I thought this is interesting, and how they kind of pulled him into it. I thought, is he going to figure out what's going on with this or not? Or that had a little dimension to it that we normally wouldn't get. So I thought that was pretty good. Okay, what did you think of the setup?
Well, the setup's interesting because, I mean, it does one thing it does kind of borrow a method they used in the second episode, the Robert Culp episode, just slightly differently. Instead of it being a memory in the past, here, as you say, the dreamy thing is, once she's kind of decided that she's going to do this plot, is she's sitting there waiting for the brother to come home. Basically, we see her fantasizing on how her plot is going to work.
Yes.
And then, of course, she hears the car, and it kind of snaps her out of her fantasy, and she gets ready for it. And then, of course, as we see, it doesn't quite go the way that she imagines that it's going to go. She forgets about a key, pun intended, key element that then forces her to panic / improvise on what she decides to do. So one couple other things I just wanted to point out real quickly, just kind of in looking this up, I had an idea. So the director was Norman Lloyd. And I didn't realize this. So it turns out Norman Lloyd is more known as an actor, and probably his two most famous roles were being the headmaster in Dead Poets Society, if you recognize him. And then, of course, I think he's the chief of staff in St. Elsewhere, which was, one of the long-running, very popular NBC dramas back in the 80s. But I was like, I was completely shocked. I was like, oh, it's him. So
wasn't St. Elsewhere the one Denzel got a start on?
What's that?
Wasn't that the one Denzel starred in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Denzel, Howie Mandel, Mark Harmon, a whole bunch of people were in St. Elsewhere, done by, was that a Bochco one? I mean, it's same folks that did Hill Street Blues. So, but yeah, no, that was interesting. And then, of course, Beth is played by Susan Clark, who, if you were a child of the 80s, like I was, you would know her most from, I would say, her most prominent role, which was the mother in Webster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I was a Webster fan, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it was her. So, that part was interesting. But, yeah, as Bixel talks about, and we'll see, kind of that transformation. But, she's very much the mousy, or at least, here we see kind of the mousy, put upon, say, black sheep of the family, because certainly we get that impression from her brother. And one thing to note too is we realize too, this was not some just spur of the moment type thing. She had been thinking about this for a while.
Yeah, it's
asshole.
What's that?
Because he's an asshole.
He's not an asshole. He's concerned. And the thing about it is, if you think about, like, say, the very first episode, which is tremendous, it's kind of superficial. You got a playboy and he just lives his whole life. There's nothing really deep to it. Here you got a bit of a family situation, and women actually in the 70s started to get into the workforce. You can argue why and everything else. That's not the point of this episode. But it's interesting because how do you deal with that? How is that going to be portrayed on TV? It's something that I thought made it pretty interesting dynamic, because he was firm with her. I don't think he was an asshole at all. And it's nepotism, no matter which way it works, which, again, normally you think it's a guy bringing in his girl, like or your lover or your mistress to work. The classic old, I'm sleeping with the boss, it's my secretary I'm having an affair with. Here you have it totally different. Well, what if a woman who is interested in something has somebody at work there too? I mean, the guy would obviously have an opinion of whether or not he thought he would be a bad dude, but it's that for some people might be like, why do they give a shit so much about this episode? Why can't we just have something cool? And I think the initial turnoff maybe for some people this episode might be the fact that she's kind of frumpy looking at the beginning. She's just sort of there. It's just kind of meh by comparison to the other episodes. However, again, that's intentional, and I do respect that more as the more this episode goes on. I will say that every episode we've seen, though, if I recall correctly, it's been in a type A's person's mansion or something like that. So we've got great set pieces and all that too. So of course it's the whole business, who's going to take over it sort of thing. But Columbo shows up. He's reading the newspaper. Some things are going on or whatever. He does what we kind of think about it too. It starts to advance a little slowly, but then I think the episode really starts picking up pace here. So Pixel, why don't you go ahead and take us through a little bit more?
Well, once Columbo gets in, here's about the situation of what happened. He's looking at a paper, like you said, the paper that went ahead and came on in.
I couldn't tell if it was the Wall Street Journal, but anyway.
And pretty much instantly he has some questions, and it's mostly the police chief really who's asking these questions to Beth, trying to get the information, and Columbo is doing as he does, listening and trying to piece things together. At this point, we haven't even talked about it yet. Leslie Nielsen has arrived on the scene because he was there. He arrived. He was told by Beth not to come, and do not come. Do not.
Well, and it should be noted too. I'm sure you probably were wondering, well, when he called, why did Beth pick up the phone and say, "Yes, I'll accept the call"? And so, basically back in the day, that he was probably calling collect.
Yes, the other person had to accept the charges.
Yeah, on the long distance call.
God, they have no idea what this stuff is. That's funny. The young ones.
But where I was going with it, she pretty much said, "No, just go, relax. We'll meet tomorrow. I don't feel up to it today. Okay? Okay. And you love me, right?" And he does arrive, and he goes through his mail, of course, and what does he see? He sees that letter from her brother saying that, well, either it's your job or her, so you're going to have to make a decision. And he decides that's enough. Initially, I wondered if he had enough of her, and maybe he was seeing her as like a favor, and it had gone too far. But that was me adding layers that didn't exist, because it seems that he genuinely was upset that he was being so controlling, trying to push him away from her. So he arrives and tries to get in, but the gate's already shut. He's about to give up, go back to the car, that's when he hears the gunshot. And so he hops the gate, runs to, and she had to rush to make it look like the scene she wanted.
Right.
She accidentally killed him. And he is now a witness to this. And after she answers some questions, he's like, that's enough. I think you have all the information you need for tonight, and tries to get him away. Columbo, at this point, he tries to introduce himself, but I'm trying to remember. LK?
Yeah.
Take us away in this part, please.
Well, I mean, Columbo's there. One thing I was going to ask both of you is, did you pick up, since now you're becoming seasoned Columbo watchers, did you pick up what was going to be the thing that tripped her up?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't. I didn't notice the paper.
Oh,
well,
no.
and this is a cultural thing, because again, back in the day, people who got the newspaper, so you would get a job as a young man or girl, delivering newspapers. It was a big deal. The Sunday editions were different. If you were in a big metropolitan area, you would have two newspapers, especially on Sundays, sometimes the morning and evening one. Even here, just west of Orlando, Florida, in Pine Hills, in the Palace, we would have the Orlando Slantinal, as we call it, because it's a horrible newspaper owned by the people that own the Tribune Company, which owned, of course, the Cubs and all that nonsense. We would have the Sun Sentinel, which was a smaller one locally, but also Sunday you could have an evening edition. So that was like a thing that just everybody got their information for the most part from the newspaper, because if it was important and hot, it got out immediately. And then you would get the television feed, and usually they would kind of match up. Today, it's kind of different. People get stuff almost instantaneously from Twitter because of the access to it. So all the stuff about calling, collecting, all that may factor in other Columbo episodes, and I'm assuming they will, just because they are. And again, the show's 50-something years old too. So I think the idea that we're seeing here, being Columbo seasoned watchers now, just with only a few episodes in, is we got the template down. Pixel, you and I have talked about this enormously. Although, LK, if you were a listener to the Extreme TV show here on the Extreme Movie Show, and you listened to our Dark Shadows review, they probably officially were one of the last TV shows or seasons that actually did this dreamy 70s like, flashback, drug-induced stance. I'll just leave that out there for everybody to listen to and plug one of our other more fun shows that we did. But yeah, the good thing here with the scene with him in the paper and looking at everything too, it's reasonable, right? She's under the influence technically of medication. We don't know what it was. Quaalude, Xanax, LSD. It's obviously something prescribed. That became a thing in the 70s. But the one thing I started noticing is Leslie Nielsen did a very good job in this episode of just being a supportive male. So we could argue whether or not the brother, like, fuck you, you're overprotective asshole male, whatever like that. You wrote a letter to her boyfriend basically saying, hey, either you got to quit or not or what. And that gives him a motive. So Leslie looks like he's going to be the plant. I thought, how is Leslie going to get drawn into this? And of course, we'll talk about that. But of course, I don't know if it was an American in Paris or what, but this lady that plays the mom that we meet is a great entrance. Columbo's looking at this light. He comes off of a ladder. This cab pulls up this lady. Basically tells him, take my luggage. She's got a dog that she carries around. Love it. He pays the cab guy, which I was like, what the fuck are you doing that for, Columbo? This is stupid. But again, Columbo uses it to his advantage. Nobody really cares that he's a cop. He walks in there and starts talking to the mom. And what does he do? He just listens. But when she comes out, she's got her hair back in a ponytail. The mother slaps her, basically saying it's her fault. And honestly, guys, we can argue this, and maybe this would be a great movie theme or TV theme to talk about later in the future. But a part of me went, this mother's performance is so strong in here, basically blaming her for his death because she's like, you killed my son. She's like, you're always impossible. A woman's intuition's never wrong with that stuff. So it's an interesting dynamic because now it's like, we got a potential cat fight brewing here in the episode. So I'm going, this lady's wearing tighter clothes. She's more business oriented. It's the longer ponytail. I would say she's sexed up the role or whatever. Of course, she's in mourning, but you can clearly see a physical transformation. Instead of walking around with her shoulders hunched over, she's standing up straight, more professional. Her mom comes in, or the mom comes in of the dead person, her boyfriend. This is a nice little scene because Columbo doesn't dominate it. It's the women who do it. We have not seen that so far. And of course, that'll lead us into a couple of scenes later on after they have an extended conversation about some facts about what happens and him talking to her about it, that we might get a first hint that he's on to her. What'd you guys make of this?
I really liked her entrance. I did. Because Columbo's just going along with it, bringing in the bags. He had to pay the cab, and all he had was, I have $11. It's $10.50. And so he goes ahead, gives the 11.50 tip, and he makes sure to settle up with the mom later. Oh, I don't have a card that I can get. Oh, okay. And she has to dig through her purse for the $11. But no, I think this is actually another advantage towards liking Beth, because Beth has had it rough. From everything that we've seen, she's had sure, she lives in a mansion, but her family just does not like her. Her older brother controlled her. Like, that's exactly how I saw it. He controlled her, and the mother obviously loved the son, and this daughter, second fiddle, doesn't matter. And I think that Beth does a decent job of keeping a stiff upper lip, even though she's not British.
Okay, any thoughts?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, a couple things. Again, he uses being underestimated by folks to his advantage, and again, the whole taxi thing too, shows kind of his gentlemanly ways. In his, because again, it's something you'll see. Other times where, somebody goes off and he, still, winds up, paying, paying this or that. And then this also shows, though, and I'll say that we get to see that even though Beth thinks she's an adult, she's still a child. And if you kind of approach it that way, even as we go throughout this, oftentimes you can still say she feels like a child playing an adult. And what stands out here is, when, mother blames her, for the death of the son, she goes, "It's not my fault." And my first thought is like, well, yeah, it is, because you pulled the trigger. I mean, even if it truly had been an accident, which of course we know it's not, you still pulled the trigger and killed your brother. It's your fault because you shot him. So to say that it's not your fault, again, to me at least, shows kind of like a childlike view of the world with this.
Yeah, one could argue the point that it's unfortunate that what could have been a very strong pro-feminist type of episode here, and in a way it still is, I'll argue. I think that the fact that she's unwilling to accept reality that she is responsible for some stuff, especially for this incident, making her she had to do what she had to do to put herself in a position to be a type A, alpha woman, a boss girl, whatever the hell you want to call it. So it's almost disingenuous for her that this is the plot device needed for that to kind of happen, because I really appreciate the transformation, because Pixel, as we see moving a little bit forward here, the thing that I noticed that was a little bit different is we get what I consider to be an extremely attractive woman who I thought might have been somebody that's giving him like a whammy burger, because basically Columbo says, "Hey, let me take you out for a burger and talk to you." We get them going back and forth about why Leslie Nielsen was there and why he might have had motive. But of course, this is obviously a period piece to throw something in back when you could have food brought out to your car. And I do remember these. Okay, you probably do too. But I thought Leslie Nielsen stood out in this episode as a nice little exchange. Again, guys I've talked about before. It's always nice to be doing something physical while something's going on, even if it's an expository data dump. Here you have that with probably what was maybe a famous place at the time, maybe still is. I don't know LA at all. Them just having burgers. Although the burgers, not gonna lie, guys, no offense if you like them or know what it is, they look like shit. But when the season's over, when they go to drive away, it's a tight scene and everything. But of course, we get at her point, we get to meet the servants, and this is when I started loving the episode, because you've got this blue, I think it's a Ferrari, right? And this is a hot, sweet ride. And so Columbo's talking to the guy, the servant, about it and everything too. He's walking on the grass, checking his shoes out. And this just kind of continues where he goes around and he tries to follow her. He gets some information and he meets Beth at a spa. And this spa scene is top tier to me, even though this episode may not be. Gorgeous looking place, gorgeous looking women. You got the 70s fashion. It's a 10 out of 10. Yes, he has to put a cigar down, but oh my God, va va voom, the way she looks with the hair. Columbo's talking to her in this scene, and her head is turned back to us, right? So she's taking those long locks, that straight hair that was kind of frumpy, then pulled back. This guy's working the comb on her while they're talking. Another example of, some motion going on while things are going on. Fantastic scene here. You just watch the curls on her hair come to life as the guy's doing it. This, guys, to me, is top tier television. You can argue that's stupid or it's dumb, but it's not. But when she turns around with the outfit on and has this short hairstyle, holy crap, talking about taking somebody to the ball. Jesus Christ. What a 70s outfit. This is tremendous. I love it. The hairstyles, the looks the people have in there that are doing it, the information that he gets, because he brings her back to her place when he then talks about the grass. To me, this is a tremendous scene, guys. What's your take?
Pixel, you want to go first?
Yeah, no, the drive-in scene, it is very nice. And Columbo, I'm not saying that he wasn't suspicious of Leslie Nielsen, but he felt like he was more just trying to get a sense of him. Like he has in previous episodes before, he just gets a feeling that, no, this isn't the right direction. What did you? I have a counter question. So, okay, why don't you go first? Because we skipped over something that Rob, of all people, should have addressed.
Well, I will go ahead. I'll address it.
How do you feel about the courtroom scene?
Oh, well, so yeah. So again, this is something that, and I don't know if they still do these today or not, but when there was a death that appeared accidental, but it was unsure, it used to be called like a coroner's inquest.
Right.
And so in a part of the investigation. And so if you remember too, as you said, there was the initial detectives on the scene. Columbo was not the one per se, like assigned to this case. And So those detectives were responsible for the inquest, and based on the information they had and what the coroner saw, this inquest, declares it an accidental shooting, which means then essentially, okay, we're not going to bring criminal charges, to this. So again, it's one of those things where I think today, if this were to happen, I think there probably still would have been some kind of like involuntary manslaughter charges or anything like that. But one interesting thing I got to point out from this scene is there is a scene where Columbo is sitting outside waiting for this to be over, and a woman sits down next to him and basically says more or less she's an astrologer, and says something to the effect of, oh, she's an Aquarius, I've got a good feeling about this, she's lucky, or something like that. And Columbo just kind of nods. And then, of course, it comes out and she goes, see, I was right. So that woman was Marcia Wallace. And Marcia Wallace is most famous, I would say most famous for two roles. Number one, she was the receptionist in the Bob Newhart show. Which she always had very funny scenes in Bob Newhart. And then she was Edna Krabappel in The Simpsons.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, amongst other ones. But yeah, her most famous voice work was as Bart's teacher in The Simpsons for many years until she sadly passed away. Yeah, but yeah,
you get a small world.
You get this. Yeah, you get this. What basically like 2-minute cameo. And again, that's especially going back and watching the Columbus. It's something that I just get a kick out of, is going, oh yeah, I remember this person. Because again, I've been watching TV for probably like 45 of my 50 plus years here. And so I just love picking those things out. But yeah, I'll say otherwise too, that yeah, the salon scene is very good. You get that real 70s vibe with it. Yeah, and you get to see the start of her transformation, and amazing what just a hairstyling can do to change a person.
Yeah, it's the thing that was interesting culturally speaking about going to 60s and 70s, and we can, again, here in the United States, we can talk about why and if we believe it, and we don't get too political necessarily, but in the early 60s, we had an assassination of a President Kennedy. A lot of people say the innocence of America died at that point. You had counterculture with people protesting different things with wars and all that too. You had a big wartime boom, probably the second biggest of all time in the United States up to that point, or really in our history. First, of course, being the Industrial Revolution era. But what's kind of interesting about it is going into the 70s at this point here, you had, getting off the gold standard, you had massive inflation. You had a sense of things were, great as American and apple pie, like a little bit of reality setting in, and cops became, instead of people to look up for, they started, I think, getting treated like buffoons. And that's one of the themes that we talk about. And I always reference T.J. Hooker as a perfect example of something in the 80s that's complete buffoon, very militant, but we enjoy it because it's played by William Shatner. But when you look at it, you're like, oh my God. And so something like here, when I talked about the feminist part about her physically changing in the spa scene, this probably was pretty typical by 70s standards. You've got the really blood red shag carpeting kind. I don't even think that it's shag, but it looks very lush. You got a beautiful woman in a pink dress that in the 70s, women would be wearing things like this all the time. But the idea in the 70s that it was extremely important still to take care of your physical appearance, and that it could make the big difference between being hired and not being hired, especially if you're a woman, so much so that women started analyzing what it was like to go into the workplace. Well, what should I wear as a woman to work? I cannot be sexy because I won't be taken seriously. How do I dress? There's always the joke in Pixel, you've mentioned this once or twice on all our stuff, like, why are her shoulders so big? I'm like, well, those were shoulder pads. Women wore those in a lot of outfits. Women had their own type of suit. And so you can start to see the genesis of some of these things from the female's perspective going through it. And you can talk about the progressive nature of politics and crime and things that happen, but it is curious to me that, like I've said, and it's just probably easy for TV writing, that everybody we've dealt with are these type A power brokers. Columbo's not investigating a murder of some junkie down the street or some average dodo that lives in a generic, white bread neighborhood. This is all power couple players. So it just is what it is. And it's LA. So, I mean, who are we to compete about it? And I will say this about the scene, and the reason why I'm mentioning all this culture is that the astrologer lady, I thought there was some interesting information there, okay, is that I always reference this in Live and Let Die. They've got the occult in there. They've got just a lot of 70s reference. That's one of the most dated Bond movies because of the inclusion of the occult, even so much so they make it a storyline. But all of a sudden, alternative forms of worship became a lot more mainstream, where you had people openly professing their love for different so-called religions or interests and all that too, and space aliens and all the pseudo-trippy kind of stuff in the 70s. So I'm not surprised by it that there's an astrology in there. People might go, well, that's kind of silly, that's kind of stupid, but very fitting for early 70s. So
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's again in Pixel. Of course, the occult's really big today, and a lot of TV shows and movies, nobody thinks twice about it. But for stuff like that to make it to mainstream TV and primetime television, even as something as silly as astrology, and I'm an Aquarius, and my sun position is in this and that or whatever, so it couldn't. That was kind of like a thing for a long time, and that's nothing new. That people think is today. It definitely existed before. So. You mentioned Bob Newhart, LK, kind of reminds you of The Office, the American version, which most people go, yeah, I know there's a British version. But you think of, what's-his-face's girlfriend, who was the secretary there at the front office. Well, Bob Newhart had that, right? You've had secretaries and other things. So there's these themes that we see in movies and television that constantly pop up. And I give Columbo for, again, early 70s being at the forefront of kind of having someone integrating the well. And again, I mentioned her transformation as just being delicious because I'm enjoying this ride. I don't give a shit about the murder. I don't care. There's a definite delight in watching her promote her husband, when she starts taking over the office room, and basically, he doesn't really want it. And as a guy, how do you feel? You're supposed to get promoted. People are congratulating you, even though you kind of don't really, you don't necessarily deserve it. That's a nice little scene. I thought, damn it, this woman's crushing it in this role. She starts off meek. Now she's running the show. And you know what? On the surface, if it wasn't for the fact she murdered somebody, you'd be buying it. That's how good she's doing in this role as her actress. So I know we talked at the beginning some of the things about her and how well it went, but for me, watching this develop and going, I see what they're doing. Her not having to yell or be in Columbo's face, taking the delicate approach, the female's perspective, like, yeah, you might be right. Totally emotionally disarming them. We haven't seen this yet. This is so good. But of course, Columbo does talk to her as he's looking to, for the light bulb and stuff like that. And then we get like this other great scene where she goes out and she's dressing stuff up. And instead of turning professional, she's turned into a sex vixen. And it's too much for him because it brings up the old ado. Hey, I loved you for who you are, not for what you've become, kind of thing that Leslie Nielsen's doing. I'm like, what a wonderful male-female role reversal. You know what I'm saying? You don't want your girl going out whoring if you married a nice one, or you'd notice the change of behavior of your significant other. And here you see Leslie Nielsen just feeling totally uncomfortable about her being a boss woman. So it's making fun of guys, right, in positions of power, but it's a legitimate point. And we know she's a murderer. So this is just good stuff. And then I'm looking at the clock going, man, we only got like 10, 15 minutes left. What a different episode this has been. It's gotten better as the episode has gone on for me.
Yeah. How did you feel about the purple outfit that she wears to show off?
Check, please. We're going back to my place. Absolutely. That was the winner. It was a great color for her. I mean, she must have read Color for Men by Carol Jackson and all that kind of stuff that was big at the day. I did not like, however, the next scene, the scene coming up where she's got the strawberry shortcake outfit on and all that kind of stuff too, where she does talk about promotions.
Where she does the actual promoting.
Yeah, that's just kind of. I was hoping for a power suit, but you can't get everything in life.
So she in that scene that's coming up, because that's actually one that I want to talk. Well, we've basically been talking about it. She's promoting him. She's saying that, well, we have been making sure that we've advertised everybody except ourselves. Well, we're an advertising company. We're advertising other people. That's kind of our point.
But you know what? What was Disney's thing when they first started? Customer service. Disney had the best customer service on the planet. You would not know that being a young 20-something, but I am telling you, down here in Central Florida, that was the gold standard. And a regional I should say southern grocery store based out of Lakeland, Florida, near where some of us actually live. Publix was known for customer service too. They took that from Disney being here in Florida because they were the gold standard. You wouldn't believe that now.
I am the gold standard, you jerk.
I'm not. Hey, I might have worked for both. You don't know this. So in my private life, where I actually am a consultant to do work for lots of companies out there, that is my primary number one focus, is how do people interact? What is your company culture? And so to me, I just think this is tremendous, because you wouldn't believe her, but when she's out there actually doing the promoting, talk about what they're doing, the first word that came to me, guys, that I'm making fun of you all that with here is, again, going back to the 70s. This isn't about, hey, we're doing work for everybody else and making a nice, easy, comfortable living. I think what's lost in this particular transition, at least the way you're talking about it, Pixel, and I'll give you a moment here to respond. And okay, of course, I want to hear you chime in. But I thought, wow, what a really progressive idea here. She's talking about branding. We want to be known as the people that get things done, not people that just do quick, simple turnaround jobs. And it's the brand that she's talking about being bigger. She's an idealist. She's got visions. That's where she wants to turn the company. That's what drives companies to change. And it's not necessarily we need to tweak this for the next quarterly revenue like Disney's doing, where they're managing by boardroom as opposed to customer service and what they're known for. Disney has lost their branding. Publix has lost their branding. You don't have service today. That used to be a prime importance there. We've talked about this before too, Pixel, in older shows, even with RDV when we cover stuff, even bad martial arts movies like one we're going to talk about tonight with Cynthia Rothrock from 1986, I believe. You see people dressed in suits. There was a level of service that was expected from you. So it's nice in here to see her be totally believable in this boardroom exchange, because even her mother, the one that mistook Columbo for a cab driver, slapped her, read her the friggin' riot act. She put everybody in place in here. This is her best scene. This lady's crushing it.
But I mean, I read it a completely different way, because
I figured you did. So tell us how you read it.
Everyone else is reacting to this because the company is already considered successful. It's not that, oh, this has been a failing company and her brother has been doing it. No, she's taking over, and this is just an example of her spiral into a power trip.
But that's what happens in all big companies, Pixel.
She's been controlled all of her life.
That's right.
And so now that she is free of her chains being her brother,
she is exercising her authority.
Yes, she is. And
she's flexing.
The company, like the one guy who tries to speak up and say, well, it's our job to advertise other people. That's what we do. And she's like, well, I think you
don't challenge a boss in a board meeting. You shut up and take it. That's how it works.
Yeah.
But
okay,
this boss doesn't know what she's doing.
I totally disagree.
She promotes her boyfriend, then fiance, that she's announced without even consulting her boyfriend.
This happens all the time.
It's just a full power trip, and that's when Leslie Nielsen says that line afterwards. I'm not sure I like who you're becoming.
Yep.
And then Columbo comes in, talking about a life.
So before we get to that, we kind of overlooked, I mean, and what I think is really kind of the key sequence in this episode is, of course, after the spa or salon, Columbo goes back to the house with Beth, and here is his suspicions are confirmed. He still doesn't have enough proof of it, but his original suspicions are confirmed by four things. A, the sports car. Because he notes, oh, wow, this is a really fancy car. You must have ordered this weeks in advance.
And she says,
and she goes, well, yes, but, I was planning a change, again, trying to deflect. And then, of course, Columbo gets the step ladder and goes up and finds the potted plant where the key was hidden, explains, and again, Pixel, this is going to be something that is completely foreign to you, is the idea that people used to hide spare keys
everywhere
in front of their house. If they, locked themselves out of a house or something, it was very common to hide a key. You don't do that today.
Okay, where did you guys hide one?
Honestly, I'm trying to think. It might have been in the garage. I think at one point we did have like one of those little hideaway key things that you would then kind of like put behind a planter.
Yep.
Yeah. So we
had an old AC unit because we had a 50s Florida block home, very popular in Pine Hills. A subdivision for the higher end people that worked at certain manufacturing places here in Central Florida. Now it's a war zone, but I still have my 5 acres I love on a nice tiny little lake. But the thing is we had the little key that we put in the magnetic case, but we could put it in a certain compartment. And remember the old wall units that you could put in, so we would have to drill a hole out of the house and put that in the concrete block.
Mhm.
That thing would withstand a hurricane. So yeah, so somebody made the comment, oh, this is stupid with the keys. I'm like, no, you're absolutely right. And again, LK, us being the 50s distinguished gentleman of this particular strain, we can concur that was legit.
Yeah, different time. And then the thing with the light bulb, Columbo noticing the burned out light bulb, and then lastly, of course, the grass, and noting the fact that well, it's dry now, but I noticed that night when I was walking out that it was damp, and when I looked at my shoes, I had grass on it. Well, there was no grass on your brother's shoes, so how did he walk across the way that you said? And then that's when you see her kind of turn 180 degrees and say, I'm pretty much done with you, stop bothering me, and closes the door.
Don't ever talk to me again. Yeah, she does what nobody else would do. Basically tells me to shut the fuck up. Let me ask you though, LK and Pixel, I don't know if you pointed this out. 2 things. One, not related at all to what we're talking about. I just wanted to make the comment to get it on the record officially. The Leslie Nielsen's medium gray combination is simply classic. Almost everybody can pull that off and wear it if you're Caucasian, let's say, because of the skin tones and whatnot. James Bond even wears one too. I believe it's from Russia with Love. That being said, we've talked about the believability of some of the clues. And so we haven't had many of them here. Mm-hmm. And so the only one that we're really thinking about is the car, maybe, if you've caught that, if you know that it takes a while to order stuff, especially if it's high end. But the other thing too would be not just the key, but the grass thing. We saw him do it. We saw him check his shoes. Okay, what's he doing? Okay, maybe he's doing that. But I don't recall, and if they did, maybe this is where I missed it. They never really mentioned anything about him walking across the grass or his shoes. So it's like, how the F would you know? It was like a quick little insertion to kind of move the plot along. I don't know if this seems to happen to Columbo, but I feel like there's one clue that I'm going, oh, bullshit, writers, you just threw that in there. Am I wrong?
I would have to go back and look, but I mean, typically, again, detective is going to go out, especially because the patio door was open, and in her initial statement, she said, "Oh, well, obviously, because he came through. I thought it was a burglar, and I shot him, because he came into my bedroom." And usually, you're going to walk around, look at the area. So I mean, it's kind of assumption. I can't remember if they specifically point that out or not. But one thing I did want to ask you guys: what did you think of the boutique scene?
Go ahead, Pixel.
I mean, I've kind of have it glazing in my head. I can't really think about it. I remember her getting dressed with Leslie Nielsen more than I do the boutique, her getting all fancied up.
I loved it.
Again, this was something, I think was probably more common, although I think if you went to some really fancy high-end boutiques or clothing stores today, you would find some similar, I'll say, amenities. But the fact that you had this clothing store that had a pool table and a bar,
I knew you were going to say that.
In that, and if you noticed in the background of the scene, the one older gentleman with a couple of younger women with him. It's a very unique type of store for the elite and the rich, kind of back in the day.
Look, there's a difference between being super rich, generational wealthy, those kinds of things. That stuff's always existed, depending on which societies you grew in and how it grows up. America being relatively, even today, is a very young country compared to others. We had an incredible amount of wealth being generated in the late 1800s. And a lot of people would argue that the post-war boom here in the United States was rather significant. So when people talk about the 50s and 60s being peak America, there's reasons why there's arguments for it. I think the whole idea of consumerism that people like to rail against, with capitalism and all that too, forget that the tax code was very punitive, did not allow it. So when things started to change, going from the 70s, especially in the 80s, the expression of how well your life was living was the fact that you had the ability to, on one person's salary, get a house, be married, raise 2 or 3 kids, have a car, have a pension generally speaking, most places. Most manufacturing jobs were here in the United States. They started shipping off in the 70s and 80s. So it was not uncommon for there to be a premium being put on service. And especially, if you're a gentleman, you're going to have your lady wear something fine and nice. That's not routine work. And if a lady stayed at home a lot of times, which she did, and then a lot of them started transitioning into the workplace, again, what works? You've got to go out and find something for it. So yeah, you're right. Okay. I do clearly recall there was much more of attention paid to like men going and getting suits and all that. So like I may have a tailor in Hong Kong, but unless I meet him once a year when he comes over to the States for measurements and all that, or my weight hasn't changed or my dimensions or anything, it's on file so I can email him. I can pick it out myself. It's not the same experience as going there and getting fitted. And so the ability to go out as a man or a woman and take your time and being waited on and all that is a beautiful experience. And I mentioned Disney earlier talking about their first brand being customer service. It's kind of similar. But you see her being very demanding, right? You see her taking charge of everything. She is dominating the scenes that she's in. Like I say, this is really, really good. And again, most of this episode has just been where we're talking about her transition, how it's a little bit different than some of the other stuff. It's been a very feminine based episode, not a problem at all. He even Columbo appears at a bar where Leslie Nielsen shows up and they start talking a little bit. But you know what? If you didn't know better, when she's sitting there laying in bed and everybody smoked in bed, Pixel. They did. That's not a joke. And drinks, and you would do exactly what she's doing, where you've got books out and sorts of stuff. She's trying to figure stuff out, but she gets the gun out, and then all of a sudden she gets up. She had it in her left hand, but I think she was a righty. I don't recall. But Columbo walks in with the gun, and the ending's right here. I'm going to go last for this. I want you guys to talk about, because we only have a minute or two here left, but she looks fantastic in her outfit there too, kind of daring for that time. How did you think about how the ending? What?
Down boy.
No, it's not sexy. It's classy. There's a difference. Anybody can twerk, sir. Not everybody can dance. All right. So what did we think about the ending and the reveal here about the fact that he busted her?
I really did like it. I really think it is a solid finish. She has pretty much completed her transformation into the woman she is now. And whenever Columbo gets in there, he reveals that, but the thing that tipped me off, the newspaper. How did the newspaper get in there? And he lets her know, I've got you. She still has the gun because this whole scene is set up like it's somebody breaking in again for real this time. But she has the gun. She considers shooting Columbo right then and there. And you don't want to do that. The police are waiting out there. There's just no point. And so she says, okay, give me a moment to get changed. And she goes, I think she's more like her mother now than she was before.
Yeah. I mean, because she makes it clear that she didn't go out for the weekend or whatever like that. So how could she have gotten the paper? And it was the paper that he was reading at the beginning. And of course, the car seals the deal to it. What I was referring to, LK, and I'll just introduce it here as we're finishing up, is that, he talks about, yeah, you can do what you need to do, but, all the cops are out here anyway. And so she just kind of acquiesces and hands the gun over. And of course, they cut to him like lighting up outside with a pull away shot of there being nobody there except him. I kind of didn't like that, to be honest with you. But what's your take, LK?
Well, so, I mean, this is the first time, we kind of see Columbo in a position of being threatened in the show, which is interesting because it happens very, very rarely, I'll say, kind of going forward. That most of the time, you'll see it. And again, because Columbo acts unassuming, oftentimes, comes off, not say friend, but a friendly adversary, especially with people who think that they're smarter than he is. That he kind of wears them down, and ultimately it's like, okay, yeah, you got me. I'm sorry. There's very often, a little pushback. Did want to go back real quickly because again, one of the key things and what seals it for him again, and this is good evidence in terms of going back. He remembered her statement and then Leslie Nielsen's statement where she said, oh, I heard the alarm and then I fired the shots. Whereas Leslie Nielsen said, oh, I heard the shots and then heard the alarm.
Yep.
that's where we get, again, one of the great kind of Columbo colloquialisms, or, things about, where he starts talking about, well, I was talking to my wife and she's talking about this and said, don't put the cart before the horse. And then that jogs something. And again, you'll see that as a trope where, Columbo, in talking to the murderer, especially in the denouement, usually, will say like, yeah, well, Mrs. Columbo was saying this, or I was talking to my brother, or, do the family kind of thing. And so that's really kind of what seals it. And again, if you go back and watch the episode, you will clearly hear the gunshots first and then the alarm, and kind of even, do that little rack focus on her pressing the button on the alarm in terms of, oh, shoot, she made a mistake because she was surprised that the brother came through the front door. But ultimately, it's that piece of evidence in terms of the sound that allows Columbo to kind of put it in his head, that put the whole sequence of how things actually played out in his head. And then, of course, that's what we see in terms of what he recreates there at the end when he comes through her bedroom door instead of the patio door that she said, and basically catches her in the lie.
Well, my final thoughts would be is that I really loved her performance. It was a bit of a different episode. I had some issues with it, half jokingly, when they show her with the security thing being set to set this up so you pay attention to it as a viewer. You clearly see exposed cabling in there, which by 70 standards would never have existed. I can't believe quality control or anybody on continuity will let that pass. Maybe that alerted me to some of the really bad technical aspects of the episode. But overall, like I said, I think weakest of what we've seen in terms of enjoyability. Very strong story. I like it a lot. Any quick final thoughts there, LK? Then Pixel will give his.
Well, I'll just say, you talk about her being strong. I see a lot, though, that we see she has this kind of delusional quality to her, that she's kind of, she's playing out some of these delusions, I'll say, in her head in terms of, how things can be, and I would say that in some of the boardroom stuff, and certainly, kind of in this final part. But yeah, ultimately of, the 5 episodes so far, it's the weakest, but it's not bad. Again,
No,
it's
watchable.
It's better than 80, 90% of what's currently on television.
Absolutely. And, classic. I could argue the contrary. Classic fake it till you make it. You never know your role till you're actually doing it, even if you're promoted. So, like the dynamic of those kinds of things, I think make that show, this particular episode, very interesting. Pixel, final thoughts?
I think even though this is absolutely the weakest episode that we've had thus far, it's still good. Columbo is still good. We haven't had a bad episode of television. I think everything that we have to say really negatively towards it, other than the production problems, has to do mostly because we've had so many fantastic episodes.
We've been spoiled. Absolutely.
We've been spoiled. And, I think that next week will hopefully still be on an upward feeling. I think that I'm still fine.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Season 1, episode 5, The Lady in Waiting, Columbo, 1971 TV. Check it out. Hopefully the next episode will be even better, because maybe it could right some wrongs, kind of like the 1986 Cynthia Rothrock movie that we're going to be joining that stream here shortly here on the Extreme Move Show. So I look for all you guys there. Thanks for watching and listening. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.
Night, everybody.
Oh, just one more thing. This has not been a Dan Curtis production.
No, it hasn't.
All right. Good night now.